Hi, everyone. Karl Sakas here. Thanks so much for joining this month's agency office hours. Feel free to share in chat where are you joining from and what are you excited about right now? Would love to hear that. Feel free to say hello. And then soon we'll dive into some hot seat Q&A. If I've been in touch to let you know that, that you'll be part of that. So thanks everyone for joining so far. Christina, welcome back. Hi, Nate. Hey, Heather. Dinos, hi. Hi, Brandon.
Good morning.
I think we actually, wow, we have 3 Brandons today, or so far. There could be more.
I was born in '70, so I'm the original.
Ah, there we go. There we go. Where, where are you joining from?
Arizona.
Ah, I had planned a trip to Tucson after Memorial Day. That obviously did not happen.
Correct. It's a little warm here. We've had about 113 temps right now.
Whoa. I
Yeah.
think it's the early 90s Fahrenheit in Raleigh. So if you have just joined, and Brandon US, yes, greetings to the various Brandons, and Brandon Cook, hello.
Hello.
Where are you joining from?
Believe it or not, Arizona.
Whoa, all right.
I'm in the Phoenix, Scottsdale, Tempe area.
Got it. I enjoyed doing a talk for AMA Phoenix a few years ago and stayed in Scottsdale, sort of like Troon North, I think, which was pretty nice.
Well, it's a great area.
Yeah. Gemma, welcome in Sheffield. Yes, Nate, good point about, if I'm asking Brandon to answer a question. Now, Brandon West, you were not in Arizona, right? You're in Florida, in Gainesville.
That's right, home of the Gators.
There we go. David, welcome. All right. Allison, hello in New Orleans. My best friend is a professor at Tulane. I guess she mentioned that apparently they have closed the bars in New Orleans or reclosed them. That sounds...
Yes, they shut our bars back down. too much commingling happened at the bars here in New Orleans.
Yeah. Though I get the impression that happens anyway, right? So it's sort of a, fighting what normally would be happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Nate, you mentioned EasyBoard. Feel free to share a link to it. A lot of agency owners are like, we want to build products. Nate has a product called EasyBoard, which if you are on a nonprofit or other board, it helps organize getting it done. Having been on many boards over the years, the last thing you need is a complicated process to keep up with just getting the job done. So from what I've seen about EasyBoard, if you're on a board, I would recommend checking it out. And Nate, feel free to share a link to it as well. Oh, there we go. All right. Peter, welcome. Thanks for joining from Curacao. We will be recording this, or in fact, we are recording it now. I'll share the recording afterwards. If you're an email subscriber, you'll get the recording later this month. And I'll also post it on the RSVP page about the free office hours. You'll be able to get that. And I'll also go in and do some deep links to specific segments. So if there's something we talk about with someone in particular, we'll be able to jump to that, when you dive in. Jeff, welcome. Thanks for joining from Austin.
Hey, thanks, Karl. Good to join you.
Absolutely. And I see people are already making connections in chat. For anyone who's just joined, please introduce yourself, where you're joining from. I'm also curious, what's something you're excited about right now? There is a lot that's not going well right now, but, is there something you are excited about? And actually, I'm also going to add a poll. I was just talking with an agency owner in Bangalore in India about sales pipeline. And I've been talking with a lot of agency owners about pipeline. What are you seeing with your pipeline today? For some, hearing people, it's stopped completely. For others, it's slow and it's staying slow. For others, it's slow, but it's getting faster. It seems to be speeding up. Some people, it's moderately fast. For some, it's going strong. I'm curious to hear what would you say? It looks like we've heard from more than 50% so far. Numbers going up. There we go. And thank you for everyone, by the way, who submitted potential hot seat questions for us to dive in on from a consulting perspective. The plan is I reached out to 3 people based on kind of the mix of questions to confirm, and we have a backup. However, I will stay on as long as you want to stay on. Like officially, this is an hour. I know some people need to leave sooner. I think last month I was on for a little bit over an hour and a half. So if you've got questions, I would love to answer your questions. So I'll start with the official hot seat people. But if I did not confirm to you yet, stick around and, we'll go from there. See, in terms of what people are excited about, York, welcome from Austria. Let's see, so Dinos, you mentioned people making changes and needing your help. Awesome. Brandon W, excited about hiring new team members. What are some roles you're hiring right now, Brandon?
We are hiring a copywriter, and we are hiring another marketing executive on the team.
Nice. And with the marketing executive, what will be their focus? Or, is it sort of mostly account management, strategy, a project, like a mix of things?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our account people right now are largely generalists. So they tend to be both on the strategy, communication, and execution implementation side.
Got it. Which makes sense, for your agency's headcount. Obviously, as you grow, it makes sense to split it. Though not everyone loves, a lot of people like doing, a bit of everything. Cool. And feel free to post a link if the job postings are online, feel free to post a link. If, for instance, if someone listening has someone on the team who maybe isn't a great fit for you, and maybe you want to kind of nudge them to a place where they'd be a better match, or if you just know people who are looking, Brandon, feel free to share the links. Oh, there we go. All right, add posts. And Andrea, welcome and congrats on becoming a platinum partner at HubSpot. That's great news.
Thank you.
And Matt, welcome from London. Thanks for joining. If people have not voted yet, sort of some housekeeping. If you haven't voted yet in the poll, please go ahead and vote in the poll. It's like we've heard from about 80% or so. Feel free to vote in the poll. If you haven't introduced yourself in chat, introduce yourself, where you're from, and what are you excited about right now? Something I'm excited about right now. So I'm starting to work on my 3rd book. First book was on helping agencies find leads through public speaking. Second book on leading marketing and creative agency teams, made to lead, different kind of lead. And then the new one is something that I've been working on with a lot of clients, especially through executive coaching, but agency roadmap projects as well, around removing yourself from day-to-day involvement, right? If you're the owner or if you're in a leadership role, it's easy to get kind of sucked into doing everything. And in the early days, that's totally normal. But as you grow, ideally you're able to extract yourself a bit. And so that's the new book about reducing your day-to-day involvement as an agency owner. And the book is called Work Less, Earn More: How to Escape the Daily Grind of Agency Ownership. Oh yeah, Nate, thank you. The person who just said, okay, we can hear you. you might mute yourself before you say something objectionable. Okay is okay, but maybe not beyond that. All right. And as a motivation, a friend of mine does this. He'll design the cover of the book, and then he will announce publicly that he is doing the book as of a certain date, and then he goes right and writes the book. I am not going to go that far around committing to the date, but I have commissioned my designer and illustrator to design the cover, and I do have the cover. So it's Work Less, Earn More, How to Escape the Daily Grind of Agency Ownership. So when will it be out? I don't know. I haven't quite gotten to that point in commitment yet, but I've got the cover and got it printed at Walgreens. So now to the rest of it. Well, thank you for everyone who's voting. And Stuart, congrats on the part-time account manager. Yes, Nate, I was holding up the cover or a print of the cover. So there we go. I have a great great designer named Chrissy Stallions in Florida, and a great illustrator named Paul Panfalone. His sort of nickname is Paul Pants. I think that's his website, paulpants.com. And he has done almost all the illustrations on my website, website and book covers and things like that. All right, that is not okay. I was wrong. That is not his website. Maybe. Yes. Well, Paul Panfalone, he's terrific. And Heather, congrats on the new podcast episode. What is the topic of the new episode? On podcasting. That is very meta. I am doing a session for Sharp Spring tomorrow. They hired me to do a webinar about thought leadership. So it's like using thought leadership to share about thought leadership. Very meta. If you're interested in checking that out, it'll be kind of like today, but like just focused on thought leadership. I'll share some tips, dive in. I just shared a link to that. So let's take a look at the poll, and then let's dive in on some of the Q&A. And I think in terms of Q&A, Jenny, if you were on the call, let's start with you talking about morale with the team. And then as I'm juggling different people, we'll go into the next hot seat. So let me share the poll results, though. And so, Jenny, if you want to be ready to unmute and what have you, we'll go over in a sec. So sharing the results, sales pipeline speed. So the largest group, 38%, said our sales pipeline is slow but getting faster. After that, it's split 23% to it's slow and staying slow, or it's going moderately fast. A little bit on pipelines going strong. I am glad to hear no one is sharing at the moment that pipeline has stopped completely. So that is good news. Plus a not sure. So let's see, grab that. And we will be talking a bit about business development today and pricing and things like that. If we don't get to a question you're wondering about and you aren't in one of the hot seat spots, stick around and I will answer your questions in the sort of overflow time. All right. So Jenny, you are up first. Go ahead and take yourself off mute and yeah, hey, Jenny, hello. If you could introduce yourself, and then if you could share your question, and then we'll dig in.
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Jenny Karn. I run Butler Inc. We are fortunate in that we have always been a remote agency. So COVID has not really posed problems for us in that sense. Everybody works from their different home offices. But it's been tough. We have a lot of clients in hospitality. So all of them put us on pause for at least a little bit of time.
Right.
Most of them are back at some level now, although our largest partner came back at only 50%. some of the other, we still have one that is paused until next month because
Okay.
their hotel hasn't actually reopened yet.
Mm.
So my question is about team morale. How do you keep people engaged and energized when life is so stressful? I mean, we have a bunch of parents on our teams who are really nervous about what they're going to do come this fall. Do they send their kids to school?
Yes.
Is there even going to be school? Will the decision be made for them? Are they going to have to make the decision? And then, of course, whatever the decision is it going to stand? You know, even if we send our kids back, there's definitely a possibility that a week or a month or more in, they'll send them all home again. So there's just a lot of uncertainty among everyone on the team, especially parents. We typically do one in-person meeting a year, an annual team summit, we call it.
Yeah.
That happens every summer. Obviously, an in-person version of that was not possible.
Right.
We are planning a digital version instead.
Yep.
That's in August. And I hope that will be a time to re-energize and get people excited. And we're trying to find ways to make it special, even though it's not the in-person, you know, happy hour bowling kind of event that we typically would have. But we just did an employee survey where we asked everyone, how motivated are you to come to work? And I don't think a single person on our team gave the highest possible score.
Got it.
And so I just, and I get it. I didn't either. I'm not giving a 7 out of 7 right now.
Yeah.
Things are tough. So I'm just, I'm curious to hear what Karl suggests, and if there are other people on the line who've had success getting people excited in these weird times. I'd love to hear that. We'd love to try some things.
Absolutely. And, you know, for everyone else who's listening, if you have suggestions, feel free to share in chat. You know, what are you doing with your team? You know, and for sure, I'm seeing some of that shift over time, right? You know, I think initially it was like happy hour every week. And then people are like, oh, not another happy hour, you know, kind of thing. So it's a tough situation. I think in general, you know, part of it is a consequence of how is team morale and cohesiveness before the pandemic. You know, like things are going to be harder, but, you know, if things were generally going well, you know, then things are going to drop. On the other hand, for agencies where things were not going well in the first place, it's going to get worse. I'm glad to hear you're continuing with the retreat and doing it virtually. I wrote some projections about future of remote work, not just immediately, but like what's next and what's next after that. And by the way, I shared in chat from Jenny's team, working from home advice, part 1 and part 2. So check that out. But if we think about what's further out, you know, remote agencies, if we assume that agencies are going to become more remote in general, they're, you know, remote agencies already tend to have, whether it's an annual or semi-annual or 3 to 4 times a year retreat to get people together. But if you can't get people together, what do? I do see growth in virtual retreats. I don't think they're going to be a great experience. So it's, you know, how do you create that? And it's actually something I'm interested in exploring myself around creating a virtual retreat offering. I did register the domain name like 5 or 6 years ago, agencyretreat.com. Don't have anything on that yet. But Jenny, let's talk further about that, because I'd be interested in doing like an offline conversation to help as I'm developing that. You mentioned that the ratings are lower. Have you noticed a trend? You know, did they drop and they've stayed low? They've dropped and they're trending down? They've dropped and maybe they're going back up? What are you noticing so far?
So I'll confess that we have not asked that exact question before. I don't have historical data. This was in the midst of COVID survey that we sent out.
Sure.
So we do always ask in our annual surveys about overall job satisfaction.
Okay.
And so I would say those scores are pretty consistent. You know, they're still in a good spot from where they were at the end of last year, thankfully. But we added the question this time, how motivated am I to come to work?
Got it.
Knowing that things are weird.
Right.
So yeah, I don't have a historical perspective, but it seems like the team could use something to get them engaged and feeling excited about our work, even though times are unsure.
Yeah. So, to an extent, there are limits to how much you can motivate people, right? If they've got major crises in life outside of work, it's going to be hard for anyone to focus on work. And in kind of an extreme example, I was in Portland, Oregon. I know we have at least a couple people who are in Portland who are on today. Hello. And at one point, I was taking Lyft from one place to another, and my driver mentioned that he was originally from the Ukraine, and he had fled the Ukraine due to the civil war there. And he had previously run a small transportation business, like sort of trucking, had a few trucks. And he mentioned that, in wartime, or he was like, he sort of set the business aside when the war started. Because he said, when it's wartime, you don't care about business. All you care about is keeping your family safe. And things had turned out okay for him. He was able to emigrate to the US and has since been reunited with his family. And, that got me thinking, right? Like, if it's wartime, your business is not the top priority. Like, safety for you and your family and your friends, is the top priority. So I don't know if you're going to get to a 7 out of 7 while the pandemic is in force. So some of it may be lowering expectations somewhat. I would say also, though, a key thing is, do people feel heard as individuals? One of my grandfathers was a business professor for 40 some years and a management consultant in organizational behavior. And I found some of his research from the 1950s, and he found that employees said they wanted their manager to see them as a person rather than just a worker. And it's like, how many companies struggle with that today, 70 years later, right? Where the company just sees them as like a worker. Are you working hard enough kind of thing? What have you done so far between you and your direct reports and managers and their direct reports? Just have one-on-one conversations, separate from the survey, separate from group town halls, kinds of things. What kind of one-on-one interaction have you had?
That's a great question. I think there's certainly room to improve there and make it more consistent. I think different managers are probably checking in with different frequencies, and a lot of reports and managers talk often, but if you're not specifically carving out a portion of that talk, talk about non-work stuff, you're probably not doing it right. So I think that we probably need to be clear with our managers about how to structure that in those check-ins and make sure that it's not just always work-based conversations.
Yes. I tend to be, if we think about the warmth and competence model from the book, The Human Brand, competence is do you get the job done, warmth is do you make people feel special. I naturally lean more toward the competence side. It's like, here's what we need to do, let's buckle down and get it done. And I actually got some feedback at a leadership retreat in 2012. Part of the process was an organization called Grinnell Leadership. So it was like a week long, including several days without your phone. It was like phones away and off. Like they had an emergency contact if people need to reach out. But, and part of it heading in was doing 360 reviews. So like reviews from people who had managed me, but also who reported to me, who were peers from almost a decade of working full time. And there was a theme. The theme was that I was good at getting things done, but not at making it fun for everyone else. Like I was too focused on, work. And what I realized was that there was a limit to how far I could grow as a leader if I didn't add, what I've now seen as warmth to two things. So if I'm having a one-on-one with a team member, it's all starting about personal stuff. I mean, as much as they want to share, right? Like, I'm not sort of demanding everyone's personal info, but even just taking a few minutes to talk about how life in general is going and making it more about them than about you makes a difference. If you're looking for a particular format for one-on-one meetings, I am a big fan of manager tools. That's manager-tools. And let me put the link to their website. They have a book called The Effective Manager. They have a new one that digs into it a bit more. They actually have a certain template for doing one-on-one meetings, O3s. 10 minutes about whatever the employee wants to talk about. 10 minutes about what you want to talk about, and 10 minutes at the end where you're talking about professional development or talking about sort of looking into the future. And, you know, that's a lot crammed into 30 minutes, but as you get into the cadence of doing it, like, it works. And importantly, to the point, when I do this with my team members, you don't drive the beginning of the conversation. Your employee does. So it's not even like, how are you doing? How's the weather today? Blah, blah, blah. No, it's, hi, so-and-so, what would you like to discuss? And the first time I did it with a new team member, her comment was, I've never had a boss ask what I wanted to talk about before. Wow. You know? Check out the Manager Tools 03 framework that you and your managers can use, because that'll help you connect with people. You know, and talking about personal stuff, like, people want to be seen as an individual. You know, and sometimes, you know, maybe someone's complaining about, you know, something random happened and you're thinking, oh yeah, okay, whatever. It's not that big for you, but it's big for them. And you're giving them an opportunity to share. So that's where I'd start, you know, looking at both warmth and competence, using the Manager Tools 03 framework in the one-on-ones. One of the pieces on that is you're ideally doing a weekly one-on-one with each of your direct reports. And of course, you might be like, well, I've got 30 direct reports. One, ideally, you wouldn't have 30 direct reports. Ideally, your span of control is 5 to 7 direct reports. So in that case, that's 2.5 to 3.5 hours a week. And the nice thing about doing weekly 03s, one-on-one meetings, using the Manager Tools format of 10, 10, 10, 10 about what they want to talk about, 10 minutes about what you want to talk about, 10 minutes about kind of professional development check-in, is it tends to head off problems, right? If you've got team members, and then this is for everyone, beyond you specifically, Jenny, you know, if you've got employees who tend to interrupt you about stuff, if you never talk to them, they're going to have to interrupt you at some point. Whereas if you've got a weekly chat, they can hold it till then, or they can often hold it till then, kind of thing. And it'll also help you head off problems before they get worse. You know, if they're thinking, well, you know, we're not going to talk for another few weeks, I guess I just won't tell them about it. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes that's bad. Sometimes you wanted to hear about it. And if you know you have a conversation, they could be like, oh, you know what, let me let them know about it the next time we chat. So I know that doesn't fix everything, but does that help?
Definitely. I think having a weekly check-in meeting sounds overwhelming, but I can see definitely the benefits.
Yes.
And if you kind of have that format, everyone knows what to expect. I think my meetings always go way, way over, but that's probably because I'm not meeting often enough. And if I met more frequently, then I might not. So to me, it's like, oh my gosh, you set it for 30 minutes and then it goes 90 minutes. And suddenly if you're having 6 90-minute meetings in a week,
that adds up. It is also, it is worth considering, in addition to doing one-on-ones, you still may need to have separate sort of functional topic meetings, right? So like the 30-minute meeting isn't enough to cover, you know, like if they're leading a major initiative and you need to provide input on it or sign off on things, that's really having a separate meeting, you know? So it's okay to have more than one, but by constraining it to 30, it makes a big impact. So feel free to email me about the retreat. You know, I talk about the idea of strategically free. I'm interested in developing that, so I'm willing to have a free chat to help as I work through that. And you'll get some more free consulting advice. Cool. Well, Jenny, thanks for joining. And, you know, of course, you'll get the recording of this later as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Next up will be Dinos. If you can, you know, if you want to stand by, you will join shortly, and you know, we'll get you slotted in. I saw just a couple other notes from chat. I see, Matt, you mentioned maybe, you know, less formal weekly check-ins, like lunch together makes sense, less pressure on people. For sure, harder at the moment with COVID. With my CMO mastermind group, usually we do a breakfast format, so like 7:30 a.m. to 9 p.m. Whoa, no, that would be quite a long meeting. 7:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. And, in the past, we've had sort of a breakfast format. Other than coffee, people aren't eating, or at least maybe they're eating very surreptitiously or something like that. People don't quite want to see each other eating while on video. All right, so next up, Dinos, you mentioned that you'd like to get some feedback about pricing and marketing and things like that. Why don't we do this? Go ahead and introduce yourself, share more about your question.
Okay.
Also, share a link to your website, and people can chime in and share some feedback.
Okay. All right. So my company name is Leading Web Studio. That's actually a rebranded name of a company that I had created in college, which was cdinos.com Consulting. And I've always consulted on the side. I've been employed part-time at points, been employed full-time, but I've always consulted. I have been doing full-time consulting for the last, 5 or 6 years, and not going back to being a full-time employee ever again.
Okay.
I love consulting too much and that direct relationship I have with people. I am getting to be a rare breed of people who I've been online since before Google existed. I've been writing HTML and designing websites. I've just had such a breadth of experience. Design, development, project management, content, data analytics, anything you could probably think of, I've done when it comes to building and managing, maintaining websites. I am a quintessential geek, if you put it another way. My websites right now, which of course I'm redesigning, and this would be a good time to get feedback. I have also started moving more towards productizing some of my services, just because I've gotten so burned out with sending people proposals that say, you need a website because X, Y, and Z. Well, you know what? Yes, you do need a website, but in today's world, it's also more about optimizing your brand across all of the different channels online. Like, it's not just about your website, it's about Google and Google My Business and Instagram and wherever is, whatever other social networks are a good fit for your industry. So I've been selling this one, most of my projects are somewhere between $3,000 and $6,000. But I've been there for 5 or 6 years. And yeah, it's bringing home some bacon, but as I'm a single person LLC. So when it comes to looking at my bottom line and saying, I'd like to make more, I'd like to earn more, I'd like to support my family more. How can I do that being one person? And so that led me into looking at my project fees.
I would say step one, triple your fees.
I'm not surprised to hear that. My 2 best clients are the ones that pay me actually 2 to 3 times more than anyone else.
Yes. What is unique about the ones that are paying more? Or, obviously they are your best clients. Is there something that's different about them versus the others, like pattern or theme wise?
In terms of their website specifically, the one biggest differentiator is they have special functionality built into their website. It's not just a brochure-based website where they have some about information and a contact form.
Got it. So rather than a brochure site, there's some sort of, it's more of a web app or there's additional functionality. Okay.
Yes.
What is different about those 2 as businesses or organizations compared to the others? Like, are they larger companies? Is it something else that, is unique in that way?
The easiest way I can answer that question is the people in that company have actually taken the time to get to know me and my history. And in fact, all of my business comes from my local area, from word of mouth, which on one hand is great that I get I get most of my referrals from my local area and people that I know.
Right.
But because of that, you know, I've also become, you know, that person who will always do a website for $3,000 because one company will say to me, hey, you know, you built a great website for us. I want you to introduce you to another company. And I'm like, oh, that's great.
And they have no money either.
And they say to me, oh, that, you know, I'm so happy to be introduced to you. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't afford you now.
Yeah. Yeah.
We could afford your pricing 5 years ago.
Right. Well, a couple of things there, by the way. Make sure that current clients know what new people are paying for a couple of reasons. One, they know they're getting a good deal. Because the reality is, if someone who's been a client for a long time, they will be paying less typically than brand new people who just showed up, right? There are certain economies to, to working with people over a long period of time, that kind of thing. But you also want to make sure they know what your pricing is for new people. So that, well, for instance, I had a call yesterday with an executive coaching client, or a couple of them, and one had prepaid for all of this year. And so he was able to lock in pricing from like a couple years ago that I certainly, you know, wouldn't offer to a new client, but I've also worked with him for a while. And I made sure to reinforce, you know, by the way, new clients, if you do executive coaching, it's $4,000 a month. And it's a bit more in the first month. You know, he's eligible for the referral program. I want to make sure, though, that he's letting people know what the new pricing is, not what the old pricing that doesn't exist anymore unless we've worked together for years, kind of thing. So that's one thing to do. That also helps you anchor things. You know, if you're raising prices for current clients, a lot of agency owners are like, well, I could never raise prices for current clients because they're used to paying, you know, this now kind of thing. It is harder to raise prices for current clients than new clients, but it is not impossible. I just shared an article on raising prices for your current clients. It really comes down to saying, using your example, you're like, hey, you know, the website, $6,000. As a heads up, new clients are now paying $20,000 and up, or, you know, whatever number. I'm able to continue working with you because I already know your business, you know, and this and that. But FYI, for future work, you know, the new pricing would apply. Or, you know what, you can give them a discount off the full price increase, but it's still an increase relative to where they are today. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Because, you know, obviously I feel like this is definitely a hot seat because my chair just got a little hotter. But like, I have done a pretty horrible job at communicating that exact thing with my existing clients.
We'll start by looking at the article on that. The key thing is giving as much advance notice as possible. The other thing to think about would be, you know, as you're working with, you know, with different businesses, you know, one shortcut, here's something to consider. So, the clients, here's something a client mentioned. I recommended she raise her prices, and she was basically like, well, my clients can't afford that. I'm like, well, okay, that's true. I know your current clients can, but can other people in your target industry afford it? You know, are you, I was sort of a fishing analogy, and I'll share my article on this about getting bigger clients. Are you fishing in the wrong spot? Like if you went upstream or downstream, maybe the fishing would be better. Or are you in the wrong river or stream or ocean in the first place? Is it that no one in the industry has money? For instance, I did work in the past at one of the agencies, Director of Client Services, with a residential realtor. He absolutely needed our help. The problem is, if you're a realtor, you know, all of your marketing expenses are coming out of your own pocket because you're commission only. So, you know, it's as opposed to, for instance, working with commercial real estate, commercial developers, they have a budget for marketing. It's not coming out of your contact's own pocket. So take a look at the article about, you know, are you fishing in the wrong spot or the wrong river? And actually, I also just wrote an article for Sharp Spring on this. I just shared a link to that. One of the themes in the agency survey that I did with them earlier this year, we heard back from almost 500 agency leaders, was people were looking for higher value clients. So I was thinking, well, okay, they were like, Karl, we want you to write an article. What's the article that would help with that? And I ended up writing, and I kept writing, and I kept writing. And what was supposed to be like a 750-word article turned into an 18-page ebook. And that's the ebook that I've linked to. How to Land Higher Paying Clients, a 7-step framework to grow your agency. And my premise in the ebook is, if you're trying to find higher value clients, one of the proxies is go after bigger companies. Now, bigger companies don't always have more money. They don't always want to spend more money. But, if you're saying the website is $20,000 or the retainer is $5,000 a month instead of $1,500 a month, if the company has 10 million in revenue, that marketing spend or design or development spend is going to be a smaller percentage than if they have $1 million in revenue. Check out the ebook. It's still hard to do. It's not an easy overnight kind of fix, but if you set your sights on bigger companies, there are a lot of things that'll make it easier. So
that actually resonates a lot. One of the things that I thought about as you were talking is I envision myself creating an email and sending it out once or twice a year to my existing clients saying, hey, we're partners here.
Yeah.
Wanted to give you an update on my company and my pricing and just kind of like general stuff like that, just to keep them more up to date, because that is just, it's not something I've been good at.
Nice. And it's not just you. I think most agencies struggle with that, right? As business owners, we're focused on taking care of our team, taking care of our clients. We can be the shoemaker's kids. The advice I got when I started what's now Sakas & Company, I had connected with someone who is a kind of a leadership consultant. He'd been doing this for like 20 years. I knew him through an industry association. And I asked him, I said, I'd love to get your advice from your doing consulting for 20 years. Any tips? I realized this might be too much overlap to your billable work. So if you can't help, I understand. He said, yes, it is billable, but I have been known to work for sushi. So I took him to lunch and he shared free advice. And one of his tips was spend 70% of your time on sales. I have never spent 70% of my time on sales, but it's a key point, a reminder that you or someone on your team needs to be doing marketing to develop leads and needs to be selling. And by the way, for anyone who's thinking, and we're going to transition over, let's see, let me check who's going to be next. Let's see, I think, Andrea, you're up next. So stand by to join us from Ontario. If you've been thinking about hiring a salesperson, that may make sense. But think about improving your marketing first, because one of the biggest ways to waste time is to hire a salesperson who has to do all the cold prospecting themselves. There are no inbound leads. That is not a winning combination. It's a lot easier if you've got a mix of inbound plus they're doing outbound work, rather than solely them having to, shake the money tree or something like that. So does that help?
It does. It
Cool.
does. Yeah.
And I see people have been sharing feedback in chat as well. So thank you everyone who shared. Oh yeah, Dinos, thank you. A good point. Nate mentioned Brennan Dunn on Double Your Freelancing has some good stuff. I see. And Christina, you said that you took my advice. Thank you. You increased the fees, gave them a couple months notice. You said it was a struggle to get them to agree, and it worked, but it worked. Awesome. Thank you. Well, next up, Andrea, if you could, go ahead and unmute yourself and join. You were mentioning basically, how do you create a unique selling proposition that truly stands out to, demonstrate the value you're delivering for your clients? So go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Karl.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think personally what I struggle with, and I don't know if anyone else in the group will have this same kind of pain point, but judging on some of the past questions, there might be a few. So I provide more or less consulting and implementation services on HubSpot. So we specialize on that software only, but we work with marketing teams. So it's difficult to be able to attribute the way that we help clients and be able to confidently say, you know, we help this client generate X leads, X customers,
Right.
X number of dollars, because it's not a single-handed project. You know, there's a lot of different parties involved. And I think I mentioned in my email, being a very numbers-driven person, I'm trying to come up with ways to differentiate my company against other agencies by coming up with unique selling propositions that are very specific. So I guess if you look across most agencies, what do you do? Why are you so great? Well, we help our clients generate leads and customers. Every agency does that. So drilling down and finding out, like, do we help them save time? How much time? You know, just maybe it's more of a opportunity to like pose to the rest of the group. How are you coming up with these kinds of metrics? How are you coming up with unique selling propositions? If it doesn't include numbers, then how are you making sure that they're unique?
Well, great question. Thank you. I think a key piece, of course, is that it needs to be unique to your target market. It doesn't necessarily be unique to like the entire world, right? So if your focus is in a geographic area, you need to be unique compared to your geographic competitors. On the other hand, if you're focused on a particular industry, you know, you might need to be more unique in that sense. It really helps to get feedback from other people. You know, and I think that's, you know, why do clients hire agencies? Part of it is they need outside perspective. You know, sometimes they need expertise that they don't have in-house. Other times it's the outside perspective. For instance, I worked with a client a few years ago where they were having some team retention problems. And I did an anonymous culture survey of the full team. And then I did follow-up chats. And it turned out that one of their middle managers was creating a miserable work environment for a significant portion of the team. The owners had no idea, but the employees who reported to that difficult middle manager certainly knew. And one of the employees said in my follow-up chat with the team, she was like, my first month working here, like due to the manager's pressure, she said, I felt guilty taking bathroom breaks. Ooh. But the thing is, the employees thought that that's what the owners wanted, that the director was basically the voice of the owners and making that happen. So like they perhaps could have realized that on their own, but, you know, needed the outside perspective. So, you know, thinking about your clients, you know, yes, more leads and all, you know, are important. I guess it is worth looking at why. For instance, the agency owner I spoke with earlier today in Bangalore mentioned that her focus, you know, there's content marketing, e-learning, and some other services, but there's something unique about her business, which is that she specializes or focuses on hiring. She sort of summarized it as women restarters. Specifically, they've taken time off to raise family or, you know, care for kids or care for family members, and they are now going back to work again. In engineering and technical roles. And it seems like they've often run into, whether it's gender discrimination or otherwise, of like, oh, well, why did you stop working for a few years? You know, that kind of thing. And for her, that's a plus as she's hiring. And I pointed out to her, like, the marketing doesn't talk about that. Like, if it's between you and another agency and things are otherwise identical and you have a social mission, they're going to want to hire you, right? There's more of a story to it. So some of the things may be unique. You know, one of the things I'll talk about is, you know, for many agency owners, you know, business is not their thing. You know, I've worked with clients where they've been embedded in business. They grew up in a family business. They studied business undergrad and or they have an MBA. You know, it's like business. In that case, you know, my value add is more about the outside perspective. But for a lot of people, about a third of my clients didn't work at an agency before they started an agency. And so sometimes people don't always know, you know, what's normal or not. Sometimes you can get feedback from your existing clients. You know, you're asking them, why did you hire me or us versus someone else? Sometimes you hear about some benefits that you wouldn't have thought of. What have you done so far to reach out to, and if you haven't yet, that's okay. reach out to current clients to ask them sort of why did they hire you versus someone else? Do you have any insights on that so far?
I don't, and that's such a great point. That sounds so simple, right?
Yep.
I mean, we ask our clients for testimonials and for reviews and things like that. So why don't we ask simple questions like that? So that alone, I think, will give me a ton of insight.
Awesome. And something else that I'd recommend, and this is for you and for everyone, if you're trying to figure out, what is the right sort of pithy messaging, what's the right way to describe things in a way that resonates to your clients, not to you, or I mean, it still needs to resonate for you, but it's more about resonating for them. I recommend doing an idea shaping session with Neen James. So Neen is a speaker, author, and expert. She's originally from Australia, lives in the US now, in Tampa, Florida. And she has this thing she calls idea shaping, the idea of building a contextual model, sort of a visual model to describe what you're doing. For instance, she helped me rework what used to be strategy, implementation, and training, the thing about the way you fit agency services together, turning that into what is now Think, Teach, Do, which is my agency services framework. And realizing, okay, it should be in a triangle, like there's sort of the triangle shape, that kind of thing. So she'll do a 90-minute session where she'll start by figuring out what is your overall messaging and positioning, kind of what's like a 2 to 6 minute, here's what we do, why, and for whom and why, and kind of give people a window into your process. So that's one of the deliverables. And the other is figuring out a visual model. And she is really quick. I've done an idea shaping session with her, the 90-minute. I've also done a hot seat with Neen on stage at an event. And in like less than 10 minutes, she helped me rework the visual model without knowing anything at the time about me or my work or what have you. She has a talent for it. If you think about the ability for someone to take in lots of information, rapidly analyze it, re-summarize it succinctly, and then share advice, she has done that in a way that I've only seen from one other person, and that other person is Seth Godin. I did an event of his several years ago, and at the end, it was like become an impresario, running events, creating events, and he opened it up to Q&A at the end, and almost everyone, there were 100 people in the audience, almost everyone asked him a question, and people would share these rambling questions. I did too. Mine was not as organized as I would have thought. And in an instant, he took everyone's question, reframed it to the core summarization of what was the core point, and then he had a great answer. And he obviously didn't have prep on that beforehand, because I didn't submit my question beforehand. He was doing it on the fly. Neen can do that too. And importantly, if you do an idea shaping session with her, you walk away with your core messaging and also a unique visual model. So I shared a link to Neen in general. I also shared a link to her booking tool. The idea shaping sessions are not cheap. It's 90 minutes and it is $3,000 for that 90 minutes. It is worth it. I've recommended her to several clients. If you're not sure if she's the right match for you, she can do a 15-minute, is this a fit, free call kind of thing. And you can book that there too. I don't get anything for recommending her, but I've been through a process myself and clients have. If you're struggling to figure out what's the unique messaging and you want to commit 90 minutes to figure it out, well worth the investment. Andrea, is that helpful as you're sorting through how to get to the right choice? So whether it's getting Neen's help, whether it's getting feedback from clients about what, led them to pick you versus someone else. I know some people are sharing things on chat. Was that helpful?
Yes, definitely. And I'm trying to keep up with chat. I'm in the car. Does the chat transcript come through with the recording?
I will figure out how to, I will at least get it to you. I don't have a good model for sharing the chat and the video, but if I don't send it to you, Andrea, let me know and I will, actually, if anyone wants the chat transcript, email me and I will figure it out. If a lot of people ask, I will figure out a way to make it happen every month.
There's a lot of good tips and links in here.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Well, Andrea, good luck as you work through that. Yeah, well, I see we've got 5 minutes left in the original time slot. The original person who had mentioned another question I don't think is on the line, but it was a really good question, which is how do you get past revenue plateaus? So if you need to drop off, you're welcome to drop off. I'm going to stay on as long as people are on. Well, I mean, if you're on for like 24 hours, that will not work. But, you know, it's an hour and a half or what have you, that'll work. But the question was, how do you get past revenue plateaus? So in that case, Kara had mentioned going from a $500,000 revenue plateau. I've helped several clients with that. But we could also look at, I also see revenue plateaus at 1 million and at 2 million in revenue. So let's talk a bit about revenue plateaus, but I want to share the results from the last survey. So here's the survey, which was, how has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted your agency? You know, in general, business is down. 55% said it's down either somewhat or down a lot. You know, 15% said it's about the same as before. 25% said it is up somewhat, and 5% said it's up a lot. So the biggest response was down somewhat, and then unfortunately about 25% down a lot. You know, I know some industries are certainly harder hit than others in terms of tourism, hospitality, in terms of events, you know, and things like that. On the other hand, e-commerce tends to be doing well, sometimes almost too well. And I think I shared a couple months ago in office hours, I have several clients who focus on e-commerce, and one mentioned they have a client who does like camping food, like freeze-dried food, you know, shelf-stable stuff, that kind of thing. I don't know if they have like astronaut space ice cream, the freeze-dried ice cream. I remember enjoying that growing up. Anyway, apparently after the CDC announcement, Centers for Disease Control, toward the end of February, about it's not a question of if, but when, within a few days, they were completely sold out on inventory. They had nothing left to sell. They actually shut down e-commerce sales because they were stocked out. And in that case, they didn't need any more marketing help because they had nothing left to sell. So in that case, that was, you know, almost, you know, too much demand versus demand deferred or destroyed. But looking at revenue plateaus, a few things to think about. So, you know, let's thinking about 500,000 as revenue plateau, 1 million and 2 million. If you're stuck at about 500,000, usually the big thing is around the owner's involvement in client billables. You know, at growing to 500,000, if you're doing most of the billables, that's okay, but it's going to be tough to get beyond that. And it's time to grow your team. You know, my usual recommendation, or in terms of benchmarks, if you take your annual services revenue and you divide it by your full-time equivalent count, your FTE count. So services revenue would be, look at your total revenue and subtract out pass-throughs. So if you have a pass-through for printing, or a pass-through for media buying, or things like that, where you sort of just turn around and hand most of the money to someone else beyond some markup, subtract that. So we're looking for your annual services revenue, or your agency gross income. Divide that by your FTE count. Now, how do you calculate the FTE count? That would be, if they're full-time, that's 1 FTE. If someone is a part-time employee, they work 20 hours a week, that's 1/2 of an FTE. If you've got a contractor who always does 10 hours a week, that's 1/4 of an FTE. Add that up. Add up the non-billable people too. They count because they throw off your number. Take a look at your services revenue divided by the FTE annually. So for instance, say your revenue is $500,000 and you've got 5 FTE. Your average revenue per FTE annually is $100,000. That's not great. If it's below 100,000, you're going to have financial viability problems. Ideally, though, if you're a generalist agency, that number is at least 150,000 a year, and that's U.S. dollars, like, you know, adjustment to if you're outside the U.S. And if you're a specialist, you specialize in a particular industry or otherwise focus, 200,000 a year. So in that model, you know, if you have 500,000 in revenue and you've got 5 full-time people, you aren't as productive as you could be, but good news, if you've got 5 full-time people, you actually could bill a lot more. Specifically, if you've got 5 people and you're not a specialist, you could increase your revenue from 500,000 to 750,000 with the people you've got already. No additional hires. You should be able to go from 100,000 to 150,000. And by the way, that $250,000 increase in revenue, that is mostly an increase in profits. So, if you look at your margins at 500,000 in revenue, if you've got 20% margins and you've got $100,000 in net profits, adding 250,000 in revenue, that's mostly profits, you can triple your annual profits in terms of the dollar amount, right? If you've got 100,000 in profits on 500,000 in revenue, and you add 250,000 in revenue and maybe 200,000 of that as profits, you just went from 100,000 in profits to 300,000 in profits. That is big. So if you've hit a revenue plateau, start by looking at productivity. What is the revenue per full-time equivalent? And that's true regardless of what the plateau is that you've hit. But 500,000, one of the big things is that the owner is still doing lots of billables. For instance, if you are doing more than 30% of your time on billable client work, that is getting in the way of your growing because you're doing everything. Now, how do you stop doing everything? Well, you need someone else to do the subject matter expert work, the SME work, which is going to be unique to your agency. But that's design, development, writing, strategy, that kind of thing, analysis. So then what? Then you can, once you fix that, maybe you're still doing sales, you're doing strategy, but you're not doing the day-to-day execution. You're not like scheduling the social media posts or writing every blog post or doing the coding yourself for every website that your agency builds. Stop doing that. Well, if you want to do it, okay, but there are limits to how far you can grow. Then you'll probably hit a plateau around $1 million a year. And that's US equivalent, adjust it to your currency if applicable. How do you get through that $1 million plateau? Well, you can get to $500,000, you can get to $1 million a year in revenue based on your personal network, based on referrals from existing clients, referrals from people you already know. It's hard to grow beyond $1 million a year in revenue if you are reliant solely or mostly on referrals. So if you want to grow from $500,000 to $1 million a year in revenue, you need to amp up your own marketing. You can't blame the shoemaker's kids, the cobbler's kids on, growing. You're going to have to do marketing. And one of the biggest questions I get from agency leaders is something like, well, what should I do for marketing? Well, what do you do for your clients? I would do that yourself. And sometimes people are like, well, we do SEO for our clients, but, SEO competing against other SEO agencies is super hard. Yes, that's why you're hopefully good at what you do. And I know it's hard, but at a minimum, you need to be doing what you're selling to your clients, because if they don't see you doing what you sell, they're going to be like, why should I pay you to do it? In sort of an extreme example, I was speaking with the owner of a web development agency that did some marketing. And they were talking a bit about, SEO related stuff, and their portfolio page, none of the portfolio pages had optimized meta title tags or descriptions. Now, Google was figuring it out, but, when the page loaded, I'm like, oh, in Chrome, it's saying like the URL instead of the title in the tab. And I, just like, you probably want to fix that if you're saying that you have some SEO expertise. So practice what you preach. Definitely do that. And, if you want to grow past $1 million, you need to remove yourself as the account manager and project manager for your client work. And if you already have, great, that's good news. If you want to grow beyond $1 million in revenue and you still want to do some client work, I'd say it's okay if you're doing sales and or some high-end client strategy, but you cannot be the day-to-day contact. That combo of doing high-end client strategy and sales, I call that, thinking of the TV show Mad Men, the Don or Donna Draper. That is, you think Don Draper in the show, as creative director, he was involved in high-level strategy, but he was not like scheduling the client meeting and keeping track of all the follow-ups from the client meeting and dealing with client requests between meetings. Like, he shows up and he gives the big pitch and, you know, wows the client, and then he leaves, and he's not responsible for all the follow-ups, not responsible for like making sure the media buy happened, kind of thing. And of course, also doing sales. If you don't like sales, that is tough because it's hard to outsource sales by hiring someone else. If you're in an ownership position or other leadership position, you're probably going to sell better than anyone you'd hire. In one case, I was helping an agency in New England who was hiring someone. They had a sales candidate, and they were like, "Oh, check him out. See any questions you recommend. We love talking to him. We're going to fly him in from Florida." And within an hour, I concluded that the candidate was almost certainly a pathological liar. And I gave the results to the owner. I had been working with her on some other stuff, so that I hadn't been involved in screening him before. And she pulled on the thread, and his whole story unraveled. And they were about to fly him in. And if he was good on video, I bet they would have liked working with him in person. Not good. So if you can keep doing sales yourself, that's ideal, and outsource the billable work. But it's going to be tough to grow beyond $1 million without getting out of both day-to-day billable client work, subject matter expert work, and your account management and your project management. And finally, if you're hitting a $2 million plateau, the big thing there is it's time to build out your sales team. It's tough to do it if you are doing the sales while running the business. You could do sales yourself if you offload most of the rest. Like, you have someone who's in a like a VP of operations role. So like, everyone reports to them, they report to you. Maybe you have a marketing person reporting to you, something like that. It is hard to grow beyond 2 million in revenue without a robust marketing and sales team and structure. So from that monologue about growing 500,000, million, 2 million, what questions do people have about what I shared? And if you have other questions, stick around. I will answer your questions. But what stands out? Oh, all right. Well, let's see. I did mention the idea of getting bigger clients. So that's check out the Sharp Spring ebook I mentioned. We'll share that again. I'm also doing a session for them tomorrow about it's thought leadership on thought leadership. And I put that together. It's sort of a good snapshot of things. Check out manager tools. Yeah, well, I would say if you need to go, feel free to drop off. If you're an email subscriber, you will get the, you'll get the newsletter. I think I've scheduled it for a couple weeks from now for the recap from today and the video and so on. If you're not on my email list already, I just shared a link to sakasandcompany.com/newsletter. More than one agency owner has said this is one of the only emails they read every time. And an agency owner in Brazil posted earlier this year, according to the LinkedIn translation, because I don't speak Portuguese, he said that whenever he gets an email from me, he stops whatever he's doing, gathers his two business partners, and they spend 30 minutes talking about the implications from what I just shared. That was quite something. The emails do go out every Wednesday and Saturday, so you could, in theory, schedule that meeting for like Thursday and Monday, I suppose. But yeah, so if you're not getting it. Let's see, Christina, you mentioned show. Oh, yeah, so Christina, I shared two things. One is the ebook through Sharp Spring, and then I just shared right after that, I shared the newsletter link. Do you see that now? Let me share it again. Do you see that? Yeah, so there we go. All right, well, oh, and if you are interested in joining next time, so two things. Here is the link I just shared to the free office hours with Karl Sakas. That is the link with the opt-in, and it'll show, oh, Christina, I guess the preview, yes, if you opt in for the ebook, you will get the newsletter as well. Christina, if you don't mind sending me a screenshot of what you're seeing, that'll help me troubleshoot that. Thank you. I'll be posting the video from today. And you also can RSVP now. Our next session, what you're at now, the agency office hours, it's every second Tuesday. And at this time slot, 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern time, same time zone as New York. You can register for any 2020 date. So our next one is Tuesday, August 11th. Same time zone, or same spot. Then it's September 8th, October 13th, November 10th, December 8th. If you weren't in the hot seat but want to be in the hot seat next time, you can put your question in when you sign up. I can, if it's a good fit for the group, we'll answer it. If it's not quite as good a fit, then we can handle it in the rollover. So speaking of the rollover, if you need to go, I'd love to hear if you'd share in chat, what's the top thing for you that stood out today? What's your top takeaway? And if you have a question and you want to stick around, please stick around. Share, what is your question? And I'll figure out, work through answering the questions. We'll stick around, from there. And if you need to go, thank you so much for joining today. We'll see you next month for a future event. So, thanks for joining. Who has the first rollover question? Nate, I see. Yeah, Nate, you'll be first because you got to chat first. And then Matt, it sounds like you have a question. All right, so it'll be Nate, then Matt. Does anyone else have questions?
Carl, I might have a question if there's time.
Got it. All right, so Brandon Cook. All right. And if someone else has a question, let's get started with Nate, Matt, and then Brandon Cook. And if you have a question we didn't get to, Patrick, hello, thanks for joining. And John, welcome back. Let me start there, and then we can dig in. So Nate, you are up, and feel free to take yourself off mute and go on video and what have you. And you just shared the questions. Cool. So
all right, hey, we got audio maybe?
Yes, yep. We can, or at least I can hear you.
Hey.
Go ahead.
So 2 questions. I just thought I would pound them out quick in chat.
Yes.
First one is maybe kind of simple, but any thoughts on like referral commission or structure for the product that we've launched for EasyBoard? We've had a couple people, mostly people that I know and have known for a bit personally, that have quite a few connections into the nonprofit space or into boards that would be a really good fit. And so they've basically said to me, hey, I like this and I'll tell people about it, but is there any sort of like structure we could work out? Because I'd be willing to actually promote it more intentionally. And I'm like, yeah, let's figure something out. But I'm not really quite sure what to tell them. And I want them to feel good about it and us to feel good about it too. I just never done it before.
Yeah.
So that's my first question.
Makes sense. So when it comes to referrals, I recently did an article about, sales referrals fees for agencies. And one of the big drivers when it comes to agency services fees, separate from SaaS fees, is that, in theory, your ongoing expenses, it's a different structure, right? Agency net margins are ideally 20 to 30% net. In contrast, a software company could have enormous margins, but you've also invested a lot in R&D.
Exactly. That's where we're at.
Yeah. So let me share my article on, this is agency sales referral fees. So it gives you some ideas on that. That was from the newsletter last week. But, thinking about it, if you were selling, say, purely an information product, if you did, say, a 20% affiliate fee, that's 20, you're getting 80% that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise, and someone is out there promoting for you. In theory, you could even do a 50% fee if this were more like a one-off kind of thing. Yeah. Or maybe it's, 50% of the first month and then nothing after that. So you have a lot of flexibility. It is worth considering, for instance, if there is some sort of a setup fee or a setup process or something like that. Sometimes what I'll see is people will say, the referrer gets half of the setup fee and then nothing after that. If you don't have a setup fee, then obviously that's not quite an option. But those are some of the models I see. Percentage, maybe for the first year. It could be a percentage for life. It could be a percentage for the first year, and then maybe it drops in half in the second year. Or maybe it's out of some sort of upfront fee. Part of it, and I think it's a bit harder given that it's a newer product, a newer service, you probably don't have a lot of data in terms of what retention looks like. If you've got,
we suspect it's long term, since our customers are already asking about, hey, if I get a little discount for being an early customer, what's my fee next year? 'Cause they're already thinking about multiple years.
Yeah,
this is a thing as a board they would invest in for years at a time, probably for quite a long time, kind of like a Dropbox or something.
And it makes sense around, they're making a budget in advance, sometimes far in advance, sometimes not so far in advance. But thinking about some of my nonprofit experience, for instance, we used an online ticketing system that involved a 3-year contract with the ticketing system. And there was certain a guaranteed annual spend that they were getting that covered up to a certain number of tickets. And then there was a per ticket fee beyond that, separate from credit card fees. We also did work with an association management company, and I think that was a 3-year contract as well. So you may want to weigh, would it make sense? And this is more about pricing rather than specifically the referral fee.
Yeah.
But, what kind of a deal do you want to offer them? You have to decide what's right for you. Some of that also gets into what are the incremental costs to fulfill the work. If you never hear from them, you could give a pretty big discount. If, on the other hand, you're hearing from them every week and you're needing to provide customer service to them, I don't know if I'd want to give as much of a discount. I think I saw an answer on Quora once on if you if you're buying a car and a friend or family member is a car salesperson, should you buy from them and get the best deal? One person commented, they were in an ownership role at a dealership. They were like, friends and family actually pay more because they're going to get way better service than random customer would, but I have to pay for that. So I thought that was kind of a contrarian way to look at it. So I know this is the first question. Does that help? The
yeah, no, that's good.
Okay.
I think thank you. So I think the second question might be more interesting to
the
rest of the group.
And Matt, you're up next. It'll be Matt, Brandon Cook, and then Gemma. So Nate, go ahead with your second question.
So my second question was just ideas and processes on how to do a better job of scoping and then bidding out a project that's likely 6 to 12 months and potentially $500,000 or more. And we actually have one of those contracts right now. And I feel like it worked. We got it, thankfully. But we kind of stumbled into it. And I'm like, there's got to be a better way to do this. Because now we're kind of in a position where I have at least some level of flexibility that I'm giving them, and as long as we're still meeting the main goal. Because with a client that's that large, things change. It is impossible, we found, to their method of some of their security systems change midway through the project. And this happens basically with every one of our larger, bigger projects. So how do you scope that and set expectations up front properly while still being able to tell them, hey, you probably need to set aside $500,000 for this project, but maybe we're going to bill it monthly or bi-weekly. And then you don't want to get them into the mindset of, well, I'm paying you by the hour, you're contractors. Right. I don't want to be in that bucket. I want to be in the deliverables side of things. Mm-hmm. So how do you stay on the deliverables more value focused?
Yes.
Without being able to, because it's impossible to accurately estimate a year's worth of work.
Well, a few things. Consider there are 3 agency pricing models, and for everyone listening, this applies to you as well. So you've got hourly pricing, which is about charging for the inputs, the hours that went into creating what you're doing. You've got milestone pricing or deliverable-based pricing. That's where you're charging for the outputs of what you do, whether the output is a website or a logo, or it could be a strategy. It could be somewhat intangible. And then value-based is charging for the results. What are the results of the work? What's the business impact? Now, a lot of people are like, we want to do value-based. And that, it's sort of good in theory. Challenge is that if you don't have a good way to confidently deliver value, that's a good way to spend lots of time and not get paid very much money. Do consider value anchoring in the meantime, where, well, the example I mentioned about, say if someone reached out to me, they had $500,000 in revenue and they were averaging 100,000 per person per FTE. And I knew that I could help them get to 150. They're going to get 250,000 additional revenue. In my experience, that's typically 200,000 in profit. So if I said, you should do a year of coaching and it'll be $4,000 a month. So it's, it'll be 50,000 with the additional payment, but it's toward making an extra 200,000 in profits. Like they pay me 50 and they take home 150. And well, then the IRS gets some of that. But, from an anchoring perspective, that seems like a good deal. And I also warn people, like it'll take between 1 and 2 years. It's not an overnight thing, but it keeps getting better. So setting aside value-based pricing, like pure value-based pricing, and looking specifically at milestone pricing.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Well, there are a few things. It is worth considering that if the scope is likely to shift radically, or the scope is going to shift, you have a couple options. One is do it on an hourly or an agile basis. Maybe you're charging per sprint. There's a 2-week sprint. They're going to get 26 sprints during the year, and you don't know what you're going to work on in the sprint, starting the week of, November 9th. But that whatever it is, it will be their top priority at that time, whatever it might be. Now, some enterprise clients don't want to commit to that. They're like, no, I want to know what we're doing the week of November 9th. The reality is, no one really knows. You could give them an answer, but it won't really be accurate. It'll be a projection. Things change, which then raises, okay, if you want to do work on a milestone basis, you should be ready for scope changes. You'd have a change order, there'd be a scope change along the way. I did a workshop for Filament earlier this year about scope creep. And one of my comments was that scope creep is, it's kind of a natural part of business. They haven't put the recording online yet, but it'll go online in a bit. The problem with scope creep is when it gets out of control and you don't manage it, and you're delivering out of scope work on an unpaid basis, and you haven't framed it as strategically free or strategically discounted. So earlier today, when Jenny mentioned creating a virtual retreat, I see that as a potential growth area for my advice. But so far, none of my current clients have been like, Karl, we're doing a virtual retreat. Can you help us with that? You know what? It's worth a conversation with her to share some free advice to help me work out what the product would look like. But the key thing is I've framed it as strategically free. It's helping me with my product development, and she'll get some free advice, kind of thing. So if you do want to stick with the milestone approach, be ready to do change orders every month, or it's going to be happening pretty frequently. And that could be the solution, right? You just know that you're going to be regularly renegotiating. So it's $500,000, you get 100,000 in, and they're like, well, things have changed. All right, well, let's the 100,000 to 200,000. Here's what we're going to shift around, and then another month later, a couple months later, oh, we're going to shift these things. That can work. It does have a tendency to delay the work because you're reevaluating what the scope is, and you're having to have those conversations. So that could work. You may want to shift to a more agile approach, which is if it's going to keep changing, don't even pretend that it's going to go the way you expected. I will say also paid discovery can help. Doing an initial engagement. I did a project as a project manager. A government agency said, we want a new intranet. Another agency that did the design, or the IA and design, They don't do development. We know you do development. Can you make it for us? They had a $300,000 budget, and they were like, we want to make it in WordPress. This was in like 2012. WordPress was not capable of doing the intranet that they wanted for $300,000 at the time. It is more capable now. And we were like, I don't know if that's really a good idea. Like, we work in Drupal. Drupal would be a better match for that kind of thing. We actually did a paid discovery where we brought in a WordPress developer, freelancer, to help us basically evaluate it. And, so he took their specifications, was like, is it possible? And Scott's conclusion was, it is possible to basically max out the capabilities of WordPress to build it as you've specified it now, but you won't be able to expand it beyond that. So it's like, yes, it is technically possible in WordPress, but there will be no expandability. And so, and the interesting thing is that if we had hired Scott to do the work, he probably would have gotten like a freelance fee of, I don't know, $50,000. So the fact that he said no to work that cost him tens of thousands of dollars, like, that says a lot. Yeah. He persuaded the client, or like with Scott's help, persuaded the client. And you know what? Scott is my go-to WordPress developer, like, almost a decade later. Like, yeah, it's good to find people who know what they're doing and, and are honest. And Scott Reston is one of those. I just shared a link. So that gives you a few options. If you want to do milestone, do paid discovery up front and plan to do change orders. Or if you know that it's going to keep changing, shifting to an agile approach, but framing it as agile rather than hourly specifically could help. Does that make sense in terms of some options?
I think so.
Okay.
Just a couple quick follow-ups, and I got to cut off so we can get to other people's questions.
Yeah, here. And Matt, you'll be up next.
Oh, thanks, Shara.
I
got launch delivery here.
All right.
All right, Shara, I'm in it. Oh, thank you very much. Okay. Thank you. All right, I'll be back. I'll be out in a little bit.
All right. So you said you had a follow. Oh, there we go.
Yes. So are you saying like deliverables based and agile are kind of two different things, or could you do agile like with 2-week sprints and each 2 weeks has a deliverable?
It would have a deliverable within the sprint. The key thing is that you are not promising a specific deliverable during the whole project.
At the very end.
Yes.
Yeah. See, so basically what we did is we have gotten a little bit better over the years. We could do better still, but we did do this in a 2-part, and we said, hey, let's do the design strategy phase as a known thing, and then let's figure out the development after that. And we gave them a rough ballpark for the development.
Got it.
But we said we can't promise because things will change, and we all know that. And they said, yep.
And it's good that they're on board with that. Sometimes clients will be like, no, we want you to guarantee everything from the beginning and everything, blah, blah, blah. That's just not realistic. I did share 2 articles in chat, one on doing pre-kickoff surveys. That's where they've signed to become a client and you want to dig into what exactly are they expecting. And I also share my pre-kickoff survey in SurveyMonkey. And that gets into things like, imagine it's 2 months from now. For you, what would success or progress look like at that point? You want to know, so then you can make sure that you get that done 2 months from now. 3 years from now, what does success look like? Hopefully the project won't take 3 years, but you want to know, like, long-term, what is it?
I hope not. Do you put this pre-survey on your website publicly, or do you only send it to clients?
I only send it either once someone has signed as a client for a custom consulting project or an agency roadmap project, or if I'm trying to scope out a custom project, I'll have people fill it out, especially if there are multiple stakeholders. One of the questions is, are there any specific deliverables you're expecting from our work together? Please elaborate. For instance, if I'm doing an agency roadmap project, there's a strategy and implementation plan. There are other things I can do as an add-on, but if people are expecting something that's not included, I want to know that so that I can highlight that it's not included. Matt, thank you. We'll see you next time. Does that help?
Go ahead and move on. I'm sure we could chat for a while. This is helpful. Thanks. We can move on to other questions.
Awesome. Nate, thank you for joining. I saw Matt had to run. Brandon Cook, you were up next, and then Gemma, and then if people have more questions after that, like, let me know. Brandon, go ahead.
Yeah, this topic of conversation has been going around in our industry and a lot of other adjacent industries. And I saw the link that was posted of the Butler Inc. Guide to Working from Home.
Yes.
A lot of people I've been listening to and consulting with have had distributed teams for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them happen to be in maybe the tech sector of what we do. On the other side of the coin, a lot of us, our hand was forced not too long ago. We didn't get a lot of prep time to figure out processes or what does this look like, and we just got thrown in the deep end, and it's been a challenging transition for some people, and I understand that at some point business owners are going to have to make a decision of asking people back,
right,
or keeping a work from home, and the other considerations aside of overhead and rent of a large studio that's empty. Every month I write the rent check. It's kind of a kick in the pants.
Yeah.
Aside from those things, which we all agree is a financial conundrum that each business owner is going to have to deal with.
Yep.
What I have noticed, there are a lot of digital tools available to all of us. This is one of them. Obviously, we're on Slack, and we've got a bunch of different ways to communicate, project management software, and so on and so forth. What I see glaring that's missing is the limitations of the free-flowing exchange of ideas.
Yes.
That off-the-cuff riffing, pardon my French, the bullshitting that goes on in a meeting. A lot of times ideas come from a joke. What we should do. Wouldn't it be funny if, and someone goes, wait a minute,
truly collaborating where it's not just here's something and then some, like it's happening in real time.
It is. And Zoom and some of the other video conferencing tools help. It's not the same when we're all looking at the same screen, when we're having to Slack links, click on the menu, then go down, it feels like it's a lot more work to have an organic, collaborative conversation.
Yes.
It's not that it's awkward or disjointed, but it is certainly more so than being, in a stand-up in a room with a whiteboard or a big screen, and a keyboard.
Yes.
So I also feel that the communication, the conversation that happens is more difficult over Slack. We've all had what would take 3 minutes in a face-to-face if I come over to your desk that takes an hour back and forth over some digital exchange. And I've also noticed that it feels a little bit more that people are becoming like inputs and they're valued on the output, which in some regards, people I've seen more productive because of the lack of distractions and they're in their own environment. Maybe they're happier working from home. All of those things are great.
Yeah.
But I find myself, it's input and output and input and output, and we're losing that human element. So I guess question one is, short of forcing people to come back, that's not a bridge I want to cross.
Right.
How have you seen people adapt to this when the company wasn't started with distributed teams?
Right.
And their hand has been forced, and we're in this kind of transition. Well, how long is this going to last? Forever? Another year? Another 6 weeks? Nobody knows.
Right. It is tough for sure. I mean, even, I've been almost entirely remote in running Sakas a company since starting in 2013. And there's still challenges. I mean, like it's been an easier transition, but it's like, I like seeing the team, at least every other week or something like that. So that's tough. As I look across agencies that I work with, I don't know if anyone has, like a perfect solution. Some of it is looking for ways to pre-schedule things so that, for instance, about like, needing an hour to nail something down, having, for instance, a weekly one-on-one with that 10 minutes, that can help, for more routine things, not as good for brainstorming, but at least, you're not getting interrupted as much. Seeing tools like, I shared a link to Miro. I've heard good things about it as a collaborative whiteboard tool, to, sort of get some of the benefits of a whiteboard, not quite the same as, an actual whiteboard, but, sort of simulating it. I'm curious, as other people are listening, like, have you found something that has worked? I think part of the challenge, Brandon, is like, we're used to that in person, and electronic just adds that extra layer. Like, I can't just like turn and ask my colleague Diane what she thinks about something. I am IMing her. If we need to do a call, I'll IM and coordinate a call, and like, it adds that extra friction. But for instance, I know that I'll usually have something that I want to talk to her about. She's returning from leave, so she's working on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I know that I'm going to want to talk with her, at some point on Tuesday, some point on Thursday. And so like, we'll pre-schedule that. So I don't always know what the topic is, but I know we'll want to talk. In terms of other pieces, let's see, John, you mentioned, John, did you want to share a bit about what you found around adjusting? And then Nate, good question about VP of Operations.
Sure. Sure thing, Carl. Yeah. Again, me and Jenny both work here at Bueller Inc. And again, we've been distributed since day one. So for me, it's 6 years or something now. So again, we didn't have that transition when COVID hit, but all of us here used to work in an office where we went into the office. So individually, we all had that transition.
Yeah.
And so I would say, like, if I had to break this down, I think there's a couple things to focus on. One is getting the right tools. And I mean, that's true whether you're in person or not in person. But finding what tools work for you. Like in our case, when I say tools, what I mean is, like, we use Slack extremely, extremely heavily. We use Google Docs and the G Suite, so you can collaborate in real time in Docs, which sounds dumb and simple, but is so much better than Microsoft Word for us, for our workflow. We've never really used video. We use video now because everybody else is on Zoom, but we'll do video conferencing just with the camera turned off. We didn't try and make that a part of it, and we never have. And that's sort of one of my other points, I think, is somebody here at our company wrote a blog post recently about virtual events and the transition of, like, in-person events to quote unquote virtual events. And the point of the article was, like, you're not going to replicate the in-person event experience online. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to have that thing where you bump into somebody and you're like, hey, let's grab coffee and chit chat. It's not there. So the way to think about it is, well, what are your goals with that event? And I think it's the same here with just working remotely. What are some of the goals and the things you're trying to achieve? And Brandon, I hear you, like that thing, the sort of serendipitous thing where you walk by somebody's cubicle and, hey, what are you working on? You chit chat. Like, that doesn't really happen when you're working remotely. You just can't do that. And I think part of transitioning to a remote workspace is accepting that you can't do that. That doesn't exist anymore. There's huge benefits to working remotely. I mean, besides in COVID, when you can, keep people from horrifically dying. Also, there's a lot of benefits to remote work, but I think you need to accept, like, you can't do that, but what is it that you're getting out of that? I mean, the Christensen way of thinking this, right? What is the job to be done of that serendipitous interaction? And it's just, like you said, a sort of free-flowing, off-the-cuff exchange of ideas. I have that all day long. All day long, I pester our sales manager on Slack. Oh, hey, man, I had an idea. Oh, hey, man, I looked at this thing. Oh, hey, everybody, here's a blog I just read. And it feels weird at first. There's no way around that. It feels weird at first because you're doing it online instead of while standing over somebody's desk chair. I swear to you, you get used to it. You just have to accept that your written communication has to go up by about 700%. And that's the thing. You just have to over communicate.
I can't agree more.
It feels like over communicating.
No, John, I can't agree more. I think there are a number of benefits that perhaps likely outweigh the drawbacks of distributed teams, especially from looking at the staff side of things and happier work life and so on and so forth. We're a design studio. If we were a dev shop or something like that, where we don't have as much tactile tools and something as simple as, like you had mentioned, a lot of that has to do with tools. Well, we have a color calibrated printer in the office. And doing CMYK work to match a PMS, or that's not something that every team member can have at home. So
Right.
the one person that comes into the office, because somebody's got to sign for packages and cut checks and do certain things,
Yep.
run the studio, answer the phones without having it forwarded to my cell. That's a nightmare.
Hmm.
Something as simple as like a package design. Well, we do a mock-up.
Right.
Well, if one designer has that mock-up in her home office, you can't walk up and grab it and flip it around. We're getting photos of it.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different with some of the physical tactile things that we do as a design studio, and it's just taking a lot to get used to. And I guess, John, you're right. We'll get there. We'll get used to it. We just got thrown in the deep end, and I am paying attention to those who, I guess, spearheaded the work from home and distributed team model, because I think I have a lot to learn from those people. But Karl, the last question I have is,
Yeah.
if we renewed our lease for 4 years, and I saw somebody else in the chat mention, yeah, hey, we've got a couple people in 4,000 square feet. That was in November. Nobody saw this coming. So I'm on the hook for another 3.5 years. And if we do end up having a fully distributed team, have you heard of any courses of actions or plans for getting with property managers and landlords about, what now? Because, a 4,000 square foot office in a very nice city that's well put together, we all probably can understand what that rent is. And if nobody's using it, it's a kick in the pants.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
So many of my clients have been negotiating with their landlord. Usually the landlords have not been too receptive, because they're like, well, we need to get paid, and you sign the contract and you signed a personal guarantee. So whether the company pays it or you pay it, you're on the hook. I think the ones, the landlords who've been most receptive are just sort of realizing like the world has changed. And if they push you too hard, like you're just going to stop paying, and then they're going to have to come after you. If you move out in the middle of the night, they have certain recourse, but also if the rent puts, and that's not, I know that's not what you're saying, but like if the rent is going to put, like if a restaurant, put the restaurant out of business, that's worse than, cutting the rent a bit or deferring the rent or something. So, some piece is understanding where they're coming from. For instance, if they own just one property, they need it to work. In contrast, if they own hundreds of properties, they don't really care about you specifically. For instance, when I moved into my apartment in Raleigh, the owner said, it was like eight townhouse style units. He's like, as long as you live here, I'll never raise the rent. And you know what? That has been true. Rent has not gone up since 2009. But he sold the building last fall, and there's a new management company. And I was like checking out the new management company in Dallas. They manage nearly 200,000 units. And I was like, okay, if I go from being one of 8 units managed to one of 200,000 managed from a company that's, 1,000 miles away, I don't think they care very much about, that my air conditioning isn't cooling sufficiently or something. And then, you know what? 7.5 months into that management company got fired, and they hired a new management company. So, it's like, okay, it's sort of, not caring. So I would take a look from a negotiating standpoint, around what leverage you have. Is this their only property that they're dealing with? Then they need it to work. They would probably consider some reductions. On the other hand, if it's a portfolio of hundreds or thousands, they're going to be less receptive. One thing that that some of my clients have seen is the landlord will say, if you move out or if you let us start marketing it immediately, we'll let you out of the lease if we can place someone else in the space. That's a risk, but if they're not going to let you out at all and you don't need the space, that at least creates a possibility. I have some clients who have sublet their space. This was thinking of an example before the pandemic. They had a really nice space in Boston, and the rents actually had gone up since they had signed. So it was almost a question of, do they give up the office because the landlord before the pandemic could turn around and charge more, right? Like lock in a higher price. They decided not to do that, but they did sublet a portion of the space to a VC-backed startup. That didn't go smoothly because during the pandemic, the VC-backed startup, their subtenant, was basically like, we are not legally allowed to work, so we will not be paying you. Not a good situation. And I worked at an agency that needed to downsize, like people were increasingly remote and this and that. And even with her very expensive lawyers, wasn't able to get them to let us out of the lease early. Like the goal in this case was to get out about 6 months early, not 3 years, 4 years.
Right.
But they would let us, if we moved out, they would start marketing it. And so they did eventually find a tenant a few months into it. So we saved a few months off the lease, but we had to move out. We moved to a co-working space, and we're like, I was in charge of liquidating the office. Turns out those Aeron chairs that were $700 new, no one wants to pay $700 used for that $700 Aeron chair. Also, no one wanted to buy the conference table. I see people buy really nice or custom conference tables. No one wants to buy them because like their taste is different and whatever. I finally ended up getting through. No one wanted the desks either to UNC Chapel Hill. A friend there was like, oh, you know what? If you're in like an auxiliary office, you have to go to the like surplus warehouse where everything is like stained or ripped or torn if you want furniture. But if they get it donated, they can get the nice furniture. So I told the friend that we had like 10 desks and the conference table. And like 2 days later, I get a call from a random other person at the university. And she's like, I am the office manager for the blah, blah department. I understand you have some furniture. And they ended up sending people out with like a 24-foot truck from facilities management and they carted it all away. At least we didn't have to pay for it. So do you have a sense of your negotiating position with your landlord in terms of how diversified they are or not? And then Gemma, you will be up next.
Yes, they are a large asset holder, a lot of retail, some office space, multiple states. So we're not one of 5 units, that type of thing. They are very good. We've seen ownership change. We've seen the property managers also change. Not a lot, 1 each. We've been in there 12 years. I think that is a testament to, we love it there. We want to be there. But if it comes down to, I have to have a conversation of, would your accountant recommend you spend, $70,000, $80,000 a year? Yes. And nobody's using it. Yeah. I've got a financial decision to make. I also think that if we were open to letting them show the place and market the place while we're in there, and we said, hey, I understand this may take 6 months, but if you do find somebody, I'm happy to help, to be there to, have the place professionally cleaned anytime you're showing, whatever it may be. Yeah. I think they would be open to it.
The nice thing too is that, agency offices are probably some of the most attractively upfitted spaces in their portfolio. So like someone else, I mean, even like a more corporate, tenant would be like, oh, this is a really cool space. They're like imagining that they're at a startup or an agency or whatever, when in fact they're like a mortgage broker or something like that. So,
that is true. When they do show people, they usually bring them into our space first.
Nice.
They, you know, this is what we can do with some TIs, you know, the allowable TIs. So they do start with our place when they're doing that. So yeah, I appreciate the input.
Absolutely. Good luck as you're working through that. You know, fingers crossed. And Patrick, I saw you mention you're able to get it 6 months deferred. You'll still need to pay it. You're looking at offering space for sublease. I think the one other angle, Brandon, as you're talking with them, would be if you think about the space, is it, you know, one, is there a sublet clause? Can you sublet it, whether with or without their permission? And is it subdividable? Either is that in the lease or not? Like, is there a place they could put a wall that wouldn't destroy the office, or, you know, that sort of works? Ideally, you'd come to them with some ideas, but by now they probably, you know, they've been getting a number of requests. They probably have some ideas too.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Yeah, so good luck. Thank you, Brandon. Gemma, you are up next. And if anyone else has questions, go ahead and share in chat if you have a question, so that I can add you to the list and go from there. Gemma, go ahead.
Hi.
Hello.
So my question is, how do you successfully get a budget out of a client? Because most clients seem to see it as a trick question. When they go through, they'll tell you, they'll talk for days about what they want and their dreams for the future.
Yes.
And you say, okay, so what do you budget for this, so that when we're quoting, we can include as much as you can afford and leave out anything you can't. And then they'll say, I've got a budget, but I'm not going to tell you what it is, because then that's how much this project will cost.
Yes, I have been there. So a few things to keep in mind, and to help frame things, could you describe your typical target client persona? You know, like, are these enterprise businesses? Are they smaller businesses? Are they nonprofit? Sort of who's your target? Because I can help customize a bit to that.
It's usually private sector and B2B.
Got it.
And really the size varies, but what we're looking at is probably a mid-sized company. They're expecting to get a lot out of what we do for them. They've already got a site normally, they've normally got some systems in place, but they want to bring it all under one roof, which is the sort of stuff that we do. So yeah, mid-sized companies with a few levels of management and decisions. Got it. And they've got a budget.
But they won't tell you what the budget is.
Nope.
Okay. And if you don't mind sharing, what would be your minimum budget, and what would be like a really nice budget? That'll try to get a sense.
It depends on what they're wanting. For a mid-sized business, if they're looking for a new website, we build them bespoke as well, so we don't build on like WordPress or something. It's all bespoke, the systems that we do. Got it. So that would start at about £25,000.
Got it.
It's in the UK. And that can go up to 80 to 100,000.
Got it. So
more complex system.
25 to 100,000 pounds.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, certainly more than what a small business is going to spend. You know, it's not what, an enormous company, like, you're not going to build the Tesco website.
No, although that's what they ask for sometimes, yeah.
Well, yes. One of my favorites was I was director of client services, and I was usually doing the initial sales screening. Like the client who showed up one day and they were like, we're interested in a website where people can buy and sell things, but, you know, not necessarily a fixed price. You know, like, you could sort of bid on things.
Oh, yeah, the eBay thing.
And you could, you know, watch certain things if you're interested in them, and this and that. And I said, oh, so an auction site? And they're like, yes. I said, like eBay? And they're like, yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, this was in like 2010.
Yeah.
I'm going to beat eBay. You know, and I'm thinking, well, you know what? Maybe if they're going to focus on a very narrow niche, maybe they could be the eBay for such and such. And I said, are you going to focus on a particular niche? And they said, no, general merchandise. And I think I gave them a very wide range. I think it was like, 20,000 to 100,000. And they're like, oh, okay. I think they were surprised that it would cost that much.
Yeah.
When I went to work at the second agency, our minimum was 75,000.
Mhm.
And the projects I was managing were usually 100 to 150. There was one that was $300,000 US that eventually got to $500,000 budget. It's all relative. So a few things to think about. One, the service you're providing, or thinking with websites and other pieces, these are things that should, in theory, have a budget. So sometimes when I'll ask prospective clients, if they have a budget in mind, I'll share kind of the way I ask. People usually don't have a budget for executive coaching or for management consulting. Some do, but it's sort of new for people. In contrast, if they're doing ongoing digital marketing, they should have a budget for it. It shouldn't be a surprise. It should be part of their cost of doing business.
Yes.
So a few ways to do it. One way is to list on the contact form. Well, okay, two things. One agency, one of our most visited pages was around iOS apps, and it was iPhone apps at the time, but iOS apps. And one of the things that people would come back with is, we'd like to partner with you on an app. That is, we, the agency, will build it for free, and if it takes off, we'd get some percentage of money, having worked for free. Yeah.
Yeah, we've had that as well.
Yeah. So one of my solutions was I updated the page to say, you want to do an app that costs, I think at the time it was like $5,000 to $20,000.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? Suddenly the would you like to partner inquiries dropped off dramatically. And that was good. At the second agency, we had a contact form, and we would hear from people who had no money. And our salesperson was wasting a lot of time qualifying people who, had big dreams and no budget. And so my solution was to update the contact page to say, thanks for reaching out. If you could tell us more about what you're dealing with. As a heads up, user research projects start at $35,000 and website development projects start at $75,000.
Mm-hmm.
That dramatically dropped the inquiries, but they were way more qualified. So that's the sort of passive way to do it. You call out what the budget range is and what the minimum is, and then let them decide, do they want to contact you?
Yes.
There is a more active way to do it. And this can be helpful if you find that your prospects are kind of squirrely. They ignore the fact that you say the minimum is, say you're like, well, 25,000 pounds. And they're like, oh, I didn't see that. Whoops. And Nate, thank you in chat. Your example, an example that Nate shared, for instance, we typically do work in the range of $50,000 to $500,000. From what you're saying so far, I'd estimate a ballpark of $100,000 to $200,000.
Mm-hmm.
We'll need to talk more about details, nail down an accurate budget. What constraints are you working with right now? That is a great way to do it. That's something I recommended for a client in Colorado where they did WordPress sites at, like max or, be like $20,000 to $30,000. And they also did custom app development for $50,000 to $250,000. And like they would sort out where they were, but like they would give that 50 to 250 range, and the client's like, whoa, that's a big range. It's like, yes. And we have a process to figure that out. Would you like to budget $5,000 for the blah, blah audit analysis, such and such? What's your, and then I also shared a link to the way I ask in my pre-intake. What's your initial reaction to those two, the passive and the active approach?
Yeah, I think they're both good. I think because we've noticed that different clients behave in different ways and respond differently as well in different ways. And when we're talking to them, we've noticed that half of them are the for, so they want something positive, and the other half are the against, so they want to avoid something negative. So it's working out which one they are and and dealing with it that way. So yeah, I think the same with decisions and getting ideas. I think we're afraid sometimes to give any sort of idea of budget at the very start. So we want them to love us first, and then they might not worry about how
Right.
much it is. But then obviously you go further down the line with them, and then they say, "Oh no, we've only got to £300."
Yeah, and you know what? I advise clients about this. I think about it, and you know what? I made a mistake of that myself. About a month ago, where an agency owner who'd been following my content for a long time was like, "Hey, need help?" Blah blah blah. It seemed like a fit, specifically a fit for either an agency roadmap project, starting at like $25,000 US,
Mhm.
or executive coaching, $4,000 a month. And I'd like linked to it, but I decided not to press beforehand about the budget because I had pointed to a couple things and I knew that he had followed my stuff. So what I found during the call, he was in Australia, so it was sort of a evening time zone for me, morning for him. We were talking for a bit, and then I transitioned to money, and he said his budget was about $1,000. I said 1,000 Australian or 1,000 US. He was like, well, ideally Australian.
Uh,
So I'm thinking, okay, US $650. And I'm like, damn it, I should have asked about that sooner. So I
yeah.
updated my pre-intake form, and I just shared that in chat. Do you have a target budget range in mind? I typically can find something that works for most budgets and client situations. And then I give some examples. For comprehensive boutique support, clients typically spend 30,000 US a year, but I have options ranging from $500 to
Mhm.
$50,000 plus, depending on your goals. And then I mentioned executive coaching pricing, which is flat, sort of fixed pricing. And you know what? I'm really glad I added that, because one person responded and she said, I'm interested in a $500 option, which in that case, I have a $500 option, which is a one-off call. And it's scope constrained. You're not getting 2 years of help for $500. You're getting
Yeah.
a phone call. Like, I spend 15 minutes pre-reviewing the survey. We're on the call for 45 minutes. You can record it, this and that, done. And sometimes people say, well, that's in the range, but it depends. Have you ever had you give kind of a range and the prospect is like, well, maybe, like, we'd have to see what we'd get for it.
Yes. Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
Gemma, I've had some experience with this because I find they clam up the most when it's a conversation, whether in person or over the phone. When you ask, do you have a budget? Sometimes you get yes, they won't share it, or sometimes, which is a red flag or an orange flag for us, is they haven't thought about it, or no, we
Oh,
don't
yeah.
in particular, which to me is that the type of client we want to work with. Maybe they're holding their cards close to their chests. Maybe they really haven't thought about a budget and they're trying to get an idea of what something like this costs to establish a budget, whatever. So what we started to do on our contact form on our website is, there's some variable logic in there depending on what it was about. But let's talk about a new project, and we'd say, one of the questions was, what's your budget? And we would give them a drop down with ranges, less than 2,500, because that was our minimum level of engagement at that time, was 2,500.
Mhm.
Well, we didn't want to tell people that outright, because sometimes there might be something for $2,000 that we would take on, such as a simple site audit or polishing a tagline for a campaign, something very low hanging. So we wouldn't say we only take projects over our minimum level of engagement. We would ask them, is it 2,500 or less? Is it 2,500 to 5,000, 5 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 50, 50 to 100, and it was a required field, so they couldn't submit the form without selecting one of those.
Nice.
And it forced them to at least guess. Hey, is this do we have 15 grand on this, or do we have 6?
Yum.
We did notice we didn't get as many inquiries. It wasn't a huge drop off, but at least it gave us something. Now, it's not as easy when you're meeting with somebody or talking with them when they start holding their, but we could, like Karl's showed a pre-intake form. We could pull up a web page where we had like a type form embedded into it, similar to what Karl's showing. And we would go to that page and say, well, this is part of it. Where do you think you'd fall? And we'd pull it up in the conference room, or we'd send them, tell them over the phone where to go. And, you got to give us an idea, because we work on time and materials, and we can do a website for 7,000.
Yep.
A splash page, but we can do a website for 700,000.
Yeah.
So that really helps, and that might be something you can try to implement.
Thank
That's
you.
a great point. Thank you. And
Gonna throw in one more thing. Sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt. I was gonna say I find that using analogies is very helpful.
yes.
So because clients don't really understand how this website thing works, sometimes they think it's just, well, aren't they all the same? It just kind of comes off the shelf. So I often use the analogy of building a building or a house. And I'll say, okay, first thing we need to do is put together the blueprints and agree on what that is. But before we can even do that, we need to figure out, what's the strategy here? How many people is it supposed to house? That kind of thing. And start to describe the process in terms of a construction project. And then they get a better idea, because you can literally say sometimes, like, it would be impossible if you went to a builder and said, hey, how much is a building? How much is an office? It's like, wow,
Yes.
what do you want? So right away they start thinking about that, and then you can have a really good conversation about what they really want.
That's
Nate,
really
that is
helpful.
so.
Thank you.
We do the exact same thing, but we use the automobile.
Nice.
And
Okay.
because whether it's a home or an automobile, nobody goes shopping without knowing what they can spend. In fact, for a house, you have to get pre-qualified, from a lender before you can even put an offer in. And just like Nate said, that's so funny. Nobody goes to a dealership and goes, yeah, how much are one of these car things?
I had heard that for Chevrolet, people would come in wanting a Corvette, and then they're like, ooh, maybe not that much. Oh, but the Camaro looks nice, is sort of the cheaper alternative.
Right. I do the same thing when someone comes in asking for us to just refresh their website. It's like, well, I think what you really want is a new house. You don't just want a little renovation, because you're talking about adding another level, blowing out the back of this thing. And, you start talking through that, yeah, you're right. I do want a new house. All right. So let's talk about that.
There we go. And ideally, finding analogies from their industry. Work with a client who focused on commercial HVAC repair, like marketing for HVAC repair, heating and ventilation.
Yeah, as long as you know what you're talking about.
Well,
you don't want to sound like a fool real quick.
So the example I made up, sort of based on my rough understanding of how HVAC systems work in a commercial setting. I said, imagine they had a client who was like, I don't want to pay for strategy, just write some blog posts, kind of thing. Yeah. And I said, well, what's an analogy from their industry if someone didn't do strategy first? I said, I imagine, let's say they were working on a project where the previous company didn't specify the appropriate size of system, and they had to go in after the fact and upgrade it. But you know what? That was a lot easier when they were building the building, and they could use the crane and put the thing on the roof while it was all open and this and that. Now you're going to have to shut down traffic, and you're going to have to do this, and you're going to have to wire everything together and this and that.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, that sounds good. And you know what? I was heading to Montgomery, Alabama for a speaking engagement. The guy sitting in front of me on the plane was an HVAC engineer heading there to solve that exact problem for one of their clients. There we go. And also to extend, further about the budget, if they don't have a budget, do not create a proposal.
Okay.
I am, adaptive in most of my advice, but that is one of the firm things, along with 20 to 30% net profit margins. If they do not have a budget, do not create a proposal. All right. Gemma, did that help?
Yes, very much so. Thank you very
All
much
right.
for everybody's advice.
Absolutely. John, I saw you had a question about, sales team structure. I shared an article from the For Entrepreneurs website, just from a venture capitalist. And he looks at how Acquia, the Drupal services company, built out their sales team. It's a lot more complicated than what independent agencies are going to do, but I think it gives some ideas of wow, if you really want to dial it up, what are the possibilities? What are the role specializations? What is the qualification process like? They've got their qualification letter and things like that. That might give you some things of you don't have to do all of that, but if you did, a quarter of it, I think would likely help.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions before we wrap up today? Oh, and Nate, I saw your question about the VP of Operations. I helped a client work through that. Did you see my reply on that earlier?
Sorry, no, I didn't. But I'm noticing the value of all the content you've created. You can be like, yeah, about this, and then hey, here's a link. So this is pretty good.
Thank you. I have over 360 articles on my website. If people are like, well, what do we really have to talk about, in our marketing? A lot of the articles I write help from a sales support perspective. I'm speaking with a prospective client. They're like, I'm trying to figure out whatever. And I've got a whole article on it, 1,000 to 3,000 words. It's a great way to demonstrate your expertise, that you didn't just make it up. That also, if you're thinking of writing a book, it's a lot of work. This will be my third book. There's nothing that shows that you know what you're doing, like you've written it down and you've written tens of thousands of words and you've put it in writing and it's now a thing, right? You didn't just make it up. Even if you take the things that you make up along the way and eventually, you validate them and then you put them in the book, kind of deal.
Okay, I see your answer now. Yeah, I think that's helpful. I don't know if you had any other comments, but no need to repeat yourself on that one.
When it comes to hiring a VP of operations, the ideal person is probably someone who was a director of operations at a larger agency, and they want more responsibility. But that means they need to go to a smaller firm in order to move up. You'll often see this with like in university administration. Someone might have been like the chancellor, the number 2 person at a mid-sized school. John, thanks for joining. At a mid-sized school, and then they become the president at a smaller school. Like they wouldn't have jumped to become the president of a bigger school or same-size school, but that's sort of like, that's how you move up. Often.
Do you think it's okay? I guess one of my concerns too is if I post this, it's kind of a smaller community. I could see people being like, I wonder what's going on. I guess it's not that big a deal, but
it's not a bad, it's really the posting is like, we've been growing and, we need more help as we grow.
Probably overthinking that part. Yeah.
I know it's 150,000 people, people get in their business. So,
that's fine. I'll think that through a little more. I think there's probably a way to do it. See, I had a person who was a project manager and she basically operated like VP of operations a couple of years ago, but we were growing too fast and it just didn't quite work out. And we ended up, our revenue was going like this and our expenses were going like this. And so we ended up having to do a couple layoffs, and she unfortunately was one of the people I had to cut. There was just no way around it because she was expensive. And I could do most of her job. Okay. But we took a step back in terms of scalability. So I kind of want to hire that person again, but I learned some from that about a few things I would change about that person, but it's just hard to find those people.
It is. One thing to look into, are you involved in the Bureau of Digital? They do events and groups and things like that for digital agencies. In particular, they have a Slack group that is very active, and there's a job board. So you can say, I'm looking for a whatever, and you can get access to that for, it's $19 a month or $199 a year. I just shared a link to their membership sign up.
Okay.
If you sign up, let them know I recommended them. And they also have some other tiers where you get discounts and other events, things like that. I guess they have team memberships too, things like that. I'd say check it out. I've been to their events. I spoke at one of their events, Digital PM Summit in 2014. Been to other things too. Like, it's good stuff, and it's nice. Imagine like today, but like 24/7, or well, maybe not 24/7, but that kind of thing. So it's a great community.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Okay. Well, it is time to go. And thank you so much for joining. And Jorg, I saw you were on. If you had a question, send me an email and we can figure it out. Thank you so much. And if you're listening on the recording, thanks for listening, and see you next month. Agency office hours. Karl Sakas signing off. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Karl. If you could send the chat to everyone, I think they'd probably appreciate it. I saw 3 or 4 people at least.
I think you can download it. There's a little icon. You can download a file. I don't know if it's a text file.
To get it faster, where it says under chat, everyone, file, and then ... Everyone, if you're listening, if you want to grab the chat, click the ... and hit save chat. That will get it to you immediately, while I meanwhile figure out a process to make it happen more processized as an operations person. So did everyone have a chance to grab it? All right. Thanks so much. Have a great month. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.